Well, in the interest of time here, we can start with a little bit of housekeeping for everyone. Again, the meeting here is an open meeting and is being recorded and will be made available to the public. We may also have members of the public sign on during the session here, but it doesn't look like anyone has as of yet. We want to welcome you to the final meeting here of this work group. Our goal today, if you had a chance to review the agenda, is to, we'll spend some time finishing up the review of the ASDSO recommendations. Our goal is to spend about 30 minutes there, and then we'll move on to any additional recommendations that task force members may have within the categories that this group is working on. Beyond that, we will ask, similar to the other groups, if someone would like to volunteer to report out from this group to the full task force when they come to their next meeting. So before we dive in here, any questions or comments here on what we hope to accomplish today? Okay, all pretty straightforward. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen then. Just bear with me while I bring that up. Interesting. Okay. There we go. Need to have that guy up. Okay. So at our last meeting, the group made it through the majority of the recommendations. I believe we only had those under the surveillance monitoring left to talk through. So in our previous conversations, the group has recognized that this is something that the dam safety program staff should have the authority and discretion to do, but may not be required, or it may not be necessary to require for all dams in all circumstances. In our last conversation, we also had good discussion about how to integrate these inspections or integrate these elements into regular inspection frequencies that dam owners are already subject to make it a little bit more streamlined in terms of the processes for sharing and reporting information. As part of the meeting materials, we shared some suggestions that Paul had put together. He volunteered to spend a little bit of time working on some suggestions there. So Paul, I might ask here if you want to share a little bit of what you were thinking with the full group.
Okay. Did you want me to share my screen on this?
Either way, if you'd like to, or if you just want to walk through it, or I can bring it up.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and bring it up?
Okay. Is everyone able to see that?
Yeah, if you scroll up. So it was the idea of simply putting being a little more explicit about the fact that surveillance and monitoring information should be looked at during the safety inspection. So I'm just suggesting under 3 there, adding another paragraph. Assessment of surveillance and monitoring data since the last inspection cycle. And then just more or less as a placeholder, but maybe it's not a bad suggestion. Every 2 inspection cycles, the whole plan should be reviewed and commented on. Maybe every 3, I don't know. It just depends how often these inspection cycles are adjusted to. And then if you scroll down to the next block there, yeah, and then here we're asking for a whole new section in the statute. So that's why it's 315XY. I think it just needs its own section, just like the EAP has its own section. And for those of you who were on the last call, I did the same thing for the O&M manual, where it's got its own section. It could be squeezed into another section, I suppose. I don't know. Does it just, this is to break it out. Prepare and keep current or surveillance monitoring plan for all high and significant hazard potential dams. Number 3 there, based on sound engineering judgment about information needed to evaluate probable failure modes of the dam, determined by a qualified professional engineer hired by the owner in collaboration with the department. So the idea is basically, you know, the owner's expert is going to be looking at the dam. The owner's expert should be most familiar with the dam and decide what is appropriate there. In some cases, maybe you're going to put monuments on the spillway to monitor if the spillway is moving over time, you know, for spillways that have a low factor of safety, for example, which is fairly common in Michigan. That might be a monitoring thing that would be suggested there by the engineer, but of course this should go to the, you know, I think we want Eagle's agreement on this sort of thing. And then scrolling down further, so those are both statutory, and then down in the rules, we're giving signal in here that this is in the safety inspection section. Again, that the surveillance and monitoring plan should be evaluated as part of that inspection. You know, the results of it, every X number, you know, I would say every inspection cycle, the results of that surveillance and monitoring plan would be looked at, and then as appropriate, you would look at the whole plan and decide if that needs to be updated for some reason. So that's the gist of it, really.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So the suggestion to amend the legislation here to require dam owners here to develop the surveillance and monitoring plans. I'd like to open it up for discussion here and just get thoughts from others.
Yeah, I think it's excellent. I just a little bit of wordsmithing, the upper section. I don't think you need to say and commented on. I think the, you know, shall be reviewed implies that if there's comments to be made, they'll be made. And then under item 1 down below, I think it's a little redundant to end the sentence say owned by that person. I think you can just end, you know, an owner who owns something shall prepare and keep current. And I think you can just end it at significant hazard potential dams. I don't think you need the owned by that person, but otherwise I think it's excellent.
Yeah, thanks for your comments, John. I agree with the first one. The second one, I do agree with too, but all I did is I copied the language that was in the statute for the EAPs, and that's the way they say it. It's kind of odd, but that's the way they phrase it. So yeah, okay. It's a good point though.
Fair enough.
Just quick question. I guess it would be the Dan or Luke. Is Luke? No, Dan. Okay. Is this all public available information?
You mean these statutes?
All this data that's collected as surveillance and monitoring, is it available to the public?
So that's a really good question. So I would say right now for like FERC regulated dams, the answer is no. You know, as far as dams that we regulate, you know, we don't require a surveillance and monitoring plan right now, and we don't receive that information usually. If it's, we occasionally get it as part of a permit, in which case, yes, then it is public information. But you know, we just don't have this information right now.
Okay, so just what? I'm sorry, just one more quick. So, you know, I'm familiar with collecting data and monitoring, and experience I've had when I was in industry is that we don't look at it very well. You're assuming the dam owner reviews it and analyzes it and then sends it to you with the report, or are you just they're going to send you just the raw data?
I would say my expectation, you guys can, you know, help to shape this, but my expectation would be that, you know, we are receiving, a summary and narrative of their findings of that data as part of the inspection report that's completed, based on the way that Paul wrote this up. And that needs to be substantiated with the data. So whether they provide us all of that data or they're providing us enough of the data to be able to, to verify that. Do I need logs and logs and logs of data over 5 years? Well, I guess we're looking at, this is only high and significant. We're looking at changing that potentially, but do I need that data? All of it? I don't know. I think it's probably one of those, as we're, looking at issues, we would want to see it.
Yeah, my only comment is the problem of collecting and not analyzing and summarizing it correctly.
Stan, this puts that impetus of summarizing and analyzing on the person conducting the normal safety inspection of the dam. So this is part of that reporting process, that they would have to look at the data, summarize it and analyze it, and it's at that time that it gets reported to Eagle. Rather than have a separate reporting cycle that happens elsewhere through the year, it would just get integrated with the safety report. But it would have to get done, you're right. And internally, the owner should be looking at that on a regular basis, themselves. That's the whole point of monitoring, is you're keeping an eye on it. But the question is, how often is that information transmitted to the state? And I think that, in my opinion, putting that together with the normal safety report would seem appropriate.
Okay. Good.
Well, a couple of things just to expand. To your first point, I think that there are cases where we do not release data publicly for high and significant hazard dams when that would pose a safety threat. So there are some exemptions from FOIA rules, but I think it's safe to say, for the most part, if it's not directly tied to safety of a dam, it would go out as FOIA. But the other thing is, I think that'd be the expectation, is that the owner's collecting and keeping this data, and then their engineer is analyzing the data. And if there's any concerns, that will be brought up in the safety report. If it's your piezometers all of a sudden start reading a lot higher and there's not corresponding to a flood event or something like that, we would want them to break that data out and say, hey, we need to do more stability analyses because something's changing in the embankment or something like that. So, but yeah, I think that's the expectation.
Is it expectation, or do we want to make it a requirement?
So
that they provide the data, or that they provide the analysis?
I'll start by saying the analysis. For example, an irresponsible dam owner, maybe, we don't want him dumping all the data in right before it's due and plotting and analyzing, once a year after the data just sits for 12 months, let's say. There's a FERC requirement that we must notify FERC of any erroneous, not erroneous, any alarming data points that are outside of the threshold levels or action levels. So they, thereby they're requiring bi-weekly or monthly review of data, in analysis of it right there as it's collected, basically.
That's a good point as far as the notification. I think so. The surveillance and monitoring plan would probably speak to the frequency and the that they're checking information. I do think that's a worthwhile thought to require them, you know, upon, like say, findings of, you know, data points beyond acceptable factors of safety that, you know, they have to notify the dam safety program right away. And I mean, that's kind of similar to one of the other requirements about, you know, any unusual events at a dam. The, you know, but as far as like, you know, they're supposed to annually, you know, review and, well, their plan is going to dictate, you know, their frequency and what they're supposed to do for evaluating their monitoring. I'm trying to think, Luke, more so from a, you know, our standpoint and looking over data. I mean, like, we're talking about upping the inspection schedule for high and significant hazard dams anyway, you know, to potentially to every year and every 2 years, I think was the recommendation. I can't remember if we adopted that or not. But, you know, that would put it in front of us more anyway. I don't know that we necessarily need to ask for the reports annually, you know, for surveillance and monitoring.
Yeah, I think maybe we can look back at the guidance, you know, the ASDSO guidance on these things. But my thought is that it becomes part of the inspection report process, similar to the FERC processes, which the owner has it on hand, all the raw data available for review by FERC engineers, or it would be, you know, state engineers at this point. But really, the report has a section on surveillance monitoring data, and the engineer who the owner hired has gone through it and parsed it down to, there are no concerns, there are concerns, here are the concerns type of thing. So I think that falling in line with the inspection report cycle is appropriate, unless there, like you said, a significant event in between inspections that we would just address kind of informally.
So the next thing I'll ask Luke, you know, for your consideration, and Mario as well, since you're on the line, is how would this work for, you know, state-owned dams or municipalities where we do the inspections?
Good question. So I think right now we have the ability to require, you know, additional analyses outside of our inspection process, you know, and that would be at the, you know, the state agency who managed that dam would be responsible for that. But the question would be, I guess, is do we have the capacity and the resources to take the raw data, you know, from piezometers and things like that, and do a cursory analysis to identify whether or not they need to go to hire a consultant and do more, right? So I think my leaning would be to we're filling that role as consultant who does the you know, who does the initial visual inspection and review of pertinent data, that we would do that first sweep. Would be realizing that would take more effort in the typical inspection process of a high and significant hazard dam.
Luke, just thinking outside the box with, you know, revisions to the dam safety program afoot, would your group consider changing that? Like, would you want to stop performing certain responsibilities that you've had in the past and make them more the owner's responsibility? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just asking a question.
So it's a it's a kind of a gray question, right? Because we're statutorily required to do inspections for free for municipalities that request it. So if you wanted to stop doing that, you would have to change the statute to no longer provide that service free of charge to municipalities who request it. The other part is that we inspect DNR-owned dams through a memorandum of understanding with DNR, which they actually fund a large portion of the program, you know, which was, you know, and I think we covered this briefly in the recap of the ASDSO. Is in 2005, the program was suspended, you know, completely shut down. The funding was removed. And then 2006, it came back but the stipulation was that DNR would help fund a portion of the program, and that's typically they pay an administration fee and they pay for the dams that we inspect in a given year. So I don't know what would be the, if DNR could, do that outside, you know what I mean? That would be the only opportunity where we could scale back from our requirements. The other one is codified in statute and would require legislative change but I don't think there's any desire from the dam safety program to do less inspections. I think that other states, have different models that they follow, where some states inspect all dams, but it's more of a cursory inspection. Some states do only high and significant hazard dams, and the rest, there's a split, and ours is by ownership, in the state of Michigan. So that's just the way it's worked out. So I don't think there's any desire by our program to do less, though.
Good. So it sounds like everyone is in agreement here that we're comfortable with the wording that Paul developed. I think I'm going to shift back over to the table with the ASDO recommendations. I can update this language to reflect Paul's recommendation. I don't think we need to go through that wordsmithing here at this time, unless anybody has a burning desire to do that.
My only question is, did we answer our own question on reporting outside of cycle? So, as Glenn pointed out, FERC has us report to them all the time. And, anytime there's an impact to the project boundary, it's almost nonstop. And so I think outside of the annual cycle of submitting a report that provides some conclusions, it's similar to the discussion we had on EAPs, where there's an obligation to report, to notify the oversight organization that you have an evolving situation. So in the case of the EAPs, you have an actual emergency evolving, and we had a vigorous debate on the absentee owner, who's actually going to make that notification, particularly if you don't have anybody manning the facility. And this is the same version of that. So these are a potentially evolving situation where you're obviously inspecting for a reason. In our case, it's daily, weekly, monthly. And then anytime you identify a deficiency that exceeds a threshold, you're reporting that to FERC, to the oversight organization, so that they can be aware and, in fact, dispatch somebody to provide oversight, to look into it, to make sure you're addressing it appropriately. So I think I would suggest we should address that in some manner here, outside of just once a year or when you get inspected. Because if you're inspecting and you see stuff evolving, you want to start that notification process probably sooner rather than later. But I didn't think from our discussion we really resolved that.
Yeah, I agree with John. I think some clarity on when the reporting cycle is, that it should be included with the normal safety inspections, and with a stipulation that, as you said, if some situation has arisen that is a potential dam safety issue, then that would need to be brought to the attention of Eagle out of cycle. But otherwise, I don't think we want it. I think we want to avoid establishing a whole other reporting cycle.
Yeah, so I think I agree with Paul on that, but I do think John and Glenn, you're right that there should be a requirement, and we can put it in there, that they need to notify the dam safety program, of concerning findings, at the time they find them. But at the same time, honestly, it's also covered under 315.20 of the statute, for sudden and unprecedented flood, unusual or alarming circumstance or occurrence, emergency drawdowns, etc. And it basically states that the owner the owner or his or her agent shall advise the department, and it's for any sudden or unprecedented flood or unusual or alarming circumstance. So, it basically, it's, this falls under that category. If they identify an alarming finding in their measurements, they need to notify us. They're required to notify us within 24 hours of the occurrence.
Okay, if you think it's covered, I don't know if it makes sense to point to that part of the statute in what we're suggesting here, just so it's clear. Because when I think alarming, that a lot of subjectivity into what's considered alarming. And, as you have erosion take place, or, a boil manifests itself, some may look at that and say that's alarming, and some may say, it's not. Just some clarity on, what our expectations are. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah, and some of that is tough too, because you don't want to, by statute, dictate, some of the inherent flexibility that you get in the plan development of a plan. So, we state that the plan needs to be developed under, based on good judgment by an engineering professional and, collaborated and approved by the department. So you want to make sure you have the flexibility for the different types of scenarios you could have at different types of dams, but at the same time, I certainly agree. You want to make sure that you have enough. It's fine within the statute there under that larger block that he has, to have, some tie back on reporting to, inspection cycle and, 31520, that talks about emergency or alarming or concerning situations.
Yeah, John, when you were talking, I was almost thinking like the nexus between these and emergency action plan too, where you have condition levels and notification, flow charts. It's almost like a mini EAP within your surveillance and monitoring plan, where if you have high piezometers, you contact these people. If you have, like you said, if you have more than a couple hundredths of shift in one of your survey monuments or something like that, that's when kicks you into the next gear, which is further evaluation and notification. So yeah, that's I think I'm on the same page.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Quick question. With Paul's surveillance and monitoring plan, I see the responsibility is for the dam owner to prepare and maintain. Does Eagle wish to develop like a standard format, an outline or minimum requirements or something, to ensure like some form of consistency? Otherwise, you'll get every plan looking completely different. You won't know where to look, because there won't be any consistency between all of them. Do we want to do something or recommend something like that?
Glenn, it's a funny question, because right before this meeting, I was looking for like O&M plan, or I'm sorry, surveillance monitoring plan and O&M plan templates. And it looks like a lot of states do put out guidance, and the one consistency is that they're all very, very different. So yeah, I think it might be a good idea to go find one that we like. You know what I mean? And, I don't know if we need to say it needs, so there's some language in the rules that I like. It's, it's for permit applications, but I think we could adopt it if we adopt the EAP standard template. Is like, I don't think we want to say, the emergency action plan should be in accordance with this FEMA document, because what if that FEMA document gets superseded in the future, right? But there's language in the Part 315 rules that say on a form prescribed by the department. You know what I mean? So that's kind of the flexibility I think we would want to use if we want to find a template or define a template for a surveillance and monitoring plan. So we could say on a form template, approved by department or something like that. Then it gives us the flexibility to change the template over time if something newer and better comes out, right? So
yeah, that's great.
This is all very reminiscent here of the conversation we had on the EAPs. Is everybody comfortable with that add here to the language? That it'd be on a form or a template approved by the department?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. A little standardization there. I guess my only added comment would be, on our recommendation in your spreadsheet there, column C, that we do maybe tie regular monitoring. We tie that to the safety inspection report as the regular monitoring. I think that might be good to state in there in our recommendation.
Yeah, and I think what we can do is revise this to say update section so 315.18 to include the things that this group just talked about, the development of a surveillance monitoring plan, points 1, 2, 3, 4, and then talk about the assessment period and cycle. So I'm offering here to translate what you shared and what this group has adopted or recommended, I should say, and replacing the wording that's in the spreadsheet here. But I feel like we don't need to go through that wordsmithing right now. I feel like
okay. Yeah, I think we just wanted to somehow in there say that it's going to be the normal reporting cycle is going to be in during the safety inspection report, you know, so.
Yeah, and I think we can add that reflects what the group has talked about. And so if everyone's comfortable with that, I can also write that up and send it out to the full group. And if anybody has any further comments here, we can take them up over email. But I just want to be cognizant of the time that we have together and make sure that we've got time here to talk about additional recommendations that committee members might want to take up. And if memory serves me here, we also had some good discussion in previous meetings, you know, regarding potential additional monitoring, especially on water courses with multiple dams. And I just wanted to flag that and see if that's an area that members would like to continue talking about.
I think I might have missed our last get together. I think I had a conflict. What's the issue with the multiple dams on a river system?
So and please correct me here if I'm missing any elements here, but my understanding here is that there was some discussion at least about, you know, in systems where there are multiple dams on the river, that there may be instances where additional surveillance monitoring and more real time may be beneficial and desirable. For instance, if you had a release at one of the upstream dams, that there could be impacts to downstream dams. As I'm checking over my notes here, I think it may have also come through on the survey that we did, you know, for members at the beginning. So just want to make sure that that's not getting lost here. Dan?
Yeah, and John, that actually came about from a talking point I had, I think, in our first subgroup meeting, where I'd mentioned as a consideration, you know, this is all really good as far as at a dam and specifically looking really at its stability. One of the other issues that, you know, we actually saw during this flood and we've seen during other floods is we'll consider maybe kind of a discontinuity amongst owners, or honestly even with the same owner between dams in regards to management of flows during an event, you know, to the extent that they have any control. And just that, you know, level of monitoring and communication in regards to, you know, water levels, flow rates, gate operations, things like that.
I don't remember the discussion on this one too much, honestly, but are we talking about putting stream gauges in, sort of thing, USGS stations?
That could be part of it. It's basically, you know, and whether this is something that's done at, well, and because I'm not even certain that, you know, it's just during emergency situations, but it's, you know, a question of should there be some form of, you know, required monitoring and reporting associated with, you know, operations and flows within the the various rivers behind dams and stuff. So, you know, some of this could be installation of more stream gauges. Some of it may be, you know, ensuring that they have more telemetry, you know, or ability to monitor water levels and report it out in a timely manner. Some of it, you know, maybe it's tied to their data operations, things like that. Just having the ability to more readily, you know, have an understanding on watersheds with multiple large dams, how those dams are functioning during an event and the impacts that that may have on, you know, downstream structures or downstream facilities. And kind of a, you know, taking this as, you know, far out as we can, you know, a consideration or a possibility for something like this would be, let's say all of these dams within a watershed had, you know, telemetry on their dams and on their, you know, upstream feeding rivers or tributaries that, you know, we have all of that information tied into a system like Dam Watch, which is a geospatially driven database system that, you know, has all the information about the dams, how they function, their, you know, flood inundation zones, you know, dam breach inundation zones, you know, and takes all of this data and is able to, you know, understand how they're functioning. And then with that, you know, ties in National Weather Service forecasting data and can actually even say, hey, based on incoming storms, you know, perhaps you should consider pre-lowering or, you know, whatever, can make recommendations back to the owners. Like I said, that's kind of looking like real extreme as one potential, you know, direction you could push this all the way to, but it's just a question of, is there anything we should be doing better for watershed scale management of systems with multiple large dams?
And would you think that needs to happen through statute and rule change, or do you think that's something that we could kind of incorporate in that, you know, that on a form to be prescribed by the department, you know, submittal of the plan, that the plan has upstream and downstream communications, you know, identify the upstream and downstream dams, when you notify them, if it's a, you know, a release of a certain flow rate or, you know, a change and whatever, that's, you know, prompts a phone call or an email or text message to the downstream dam owners. I don't know. I mean, obviously that doesn't get to the level of the Dam Watch stuff, but it's something that maybe we could have some flexibility to require within the plan, you know,
yeah.
And then the implementation of that plan, whatever that looks like. Or is it something that needs to rise to the level of there needs to be a provision in the law or rules that state that specifically?
I don't know. It sounds like a lot of monitoring and control. I mean, are we going to be asking all dam owners to gauge their dams so they know how much discharge they're producing based on gate openings, sort of thing? And then have a certain kind of telemetry system that's going to notify a downstream owner? I mean, the notification of downstream dams is part of your EAP, right? That if you're having an issue, you have to release water, then there's supposed to be a list there of your downstream dam owners who and their names and phone numbers and whatever else. That to me seems like the notification system. I don't know. I guess I'm a little vague about what's.
Yeah, and this is something that I think, you know, you guys are right. This very well could just be covered under operation and maintenance and EAPs. You know, by requiring that operation and maintenance plan, you know, and developing that out with the owners, you know, that can be something that can be discussed with the individual owners, and especially, like I said, in these watershed systems where we've got multiple large dams. The EAP, you're right, should include that. I don't believe that the EAPs for some of the dams did necessarily incorporate communication between dam owners, you know, on some of the recent floods. So, you know, that's something that does need to be addressed. But
when I had the benefit of facilitating the group that talked about the EAPs, and Luke, I might lean on you here a little bit. Is that included within the best practice documents that recommendation references?
Certainly, it's downstream dams that would be impacted by, you know, the conditions that warrant activation of the EAP would be in there. But I think there might need to be a distinction between kind of more of your run-of-the-mill operations, you know, where, you know, a lot of times what we see at dams is, you know, the dam operator is running a little high, so they crack a gate, you know, and then they leave for the night. And then the next morning, the dam operator for the next downstream dam comes and go, holy crap, we got to open all these gates. And it's like it's like when the guy in front of you jams on his brakes, and then 5 miles up the road, there's stop traffic. It's the same thing, you know. It's like if they would have said, hey, you know, next downstream dam owner, I'm going to increase my releases to, whether it's a gate opening size or a flow rate estimated or what, you should do whatever you need to do in the next couple hours to account for that, so you're not having these wild fluctuations in flow rate and pond level, right? Where, you know, so like I said, I don't think necessarily those would always warrant activation of the EAP unless it was during a large flood. But, you know, so I think it's good. And Paul, we get a lot of calls like this all the time, like, hey, you know, I'm such and such, I have a dam upstream of me, and they never call me. And all of a sudden they're dumping water and I'm reacting, right? So I think it's probably a good thing to do, you know. I don't know if it's through O&M or if it's through this surveillance and monitoring plan, and obviously this would be, again, commensurate with the level of risk and the complexity of the dams. You know, if you've got a fixed crest weir that you don't have any gates to adjust, you know, there's no telemetry data, you know, that the next downstream guy needs to know about, you know, unless it's a failure coming his way, you know, like, hey, we've got a embankment instability issue and we're expecting breach. That would be EAP activation. But on some of these dams that are, you know, have a lot of gate capacity that can change the flows pretty quickly in a river, there might need to be some downstream dam owner notification process, and, you know, whatever that looks like.
Well, I think, yeah, I understand. I mean, you know, as far as informing the downstream dam owners, and that needs to happen. And really, it's just, for the most part, as simple as the upstream guy sending a text to the other guy and say, hey, I got to open up a gate because I have to clear a log out of my spillway.
Well, the problem is, though, is that you use the word simple and, you know, all these basic words and stuff, but in my experience, it never happens. I never get notifications. I get one notification a year, and that's when the Washtenaw County lowers Portage Base, the whole chain of lakes. But outside of that, any of their operations, nothing.
And like I said, I think this, you know, my original thought or recommendation was to require, I think I'd stated as like a watershed management plan for multiple, for systems with multiple dams. I can't remember if I said in series or whatever, but I guess you could say it's an operation in EAP, but it's on a watershed scales. So it's acknowledging that these dam owners aren't just working in a silo, but they need to work on a watershed scale.
So maybe as just a suggestion to keep it moving forward, and you guys can poo-poo it or whatever you want to do, but maybe there's provisions like a section in each one of these plans, whether it's the EAP, this, you know, surveillance and monitoring plan, or the operation management plan that says, are you in a system with, you know, a series of dams on the same system? And then there's, you know, then there's a requirement that those folks get together and hash out, you know, what are appropriate notifications under what circumstances. you know, in each of the plans, you know, of whether it's, I just need a courtesy text message, like Paul said, when anytime you're going to flush a gate system, or I need, you know, I need a phone call that your dam's failing and I got to start, you know, emergency evacuations downstream of my dam, or whatever that looks like. But I mean, I think that would be my suggestion, is have like a section. If we're going to adopt recommendations that say we're going to adopt certain templates or best practices documents, we just need to ensure that those best practices documents have provisions for this kind of watershed-wide approach to dam operations, whether it's emergency operations or standard operations. If there are other dams in your vicinity that are impacted by the operation of your dam, you need to have them be part of that plan, and you need to work out what level of notification is appropriate so that you guys can coordinate, you know, operation of the dam during an emergency, or during, like Paul suggested, flushing of a gate or something like that. That would be my suggestion.
Glenn or John, I'm curious here what you think of what Luke suggested.
I like, oh, John, did you want to go? I was going to say, I like what Luke said, and I've seen it work, you know, between ourselves and Ford Lake. Ford Lake is a very significant sized dam, and it works well. And I wonder if, you know, in developing, you know, written materials, that there could be like a section, you know, a section called coordination with downstream dams or something like that. And then, you know, that it becomes part of that whole process, that it's not overlooked, it's not forgotten, you know, it's part of preparing the materials.
John?
So we have 5 dams that are interconnected on the Al Sabal, and so the issue's real. You know, since we operate all 5, we know if we see excess either rainfall or we make an adjustment upstream, it's going to impact you know, downstream more or less. When we were talking about the Dam Watch program, I wonder if it's a bit of an overreach in terms of a recommendation, because that's like an ideal world, unlimited resources kind of thing, and it sounds fantastic, but I don't know how realistic it is. And part of the conversation sounds like it's broaching into overall watershed management. You know, there's certain parts of the state where that's an issue outside of dam safety. You know, you look at the Kalamazoo area and some of the flooding issues we have due to, you know, what's more so watershed management and alterations of the watershed that have now impacted, you know, certain lakes, certain bodies of water. And I don't know enough about how the state manages watersheds in general to think that is that outside of our purview here. But I think including the, you know, again, perfect world, we would love to have everybody in perfect coordination and everybody notifies everybody of what they're doing. I don't know if that is beyond, you know, our focus, which is really dam safety, but let's include it so that we have it on the list, and then figure out where the right thing is to land it. But does Dan or Luke, on the watershed management question, is that other agencies? Is that who in Michigan is responsible for watershed management?
Luke, I'm going to defer to you. I mean, that's a good question. I know I can't remember which department within our division that requires or is engaged, not necessarily requires, but reviews and is engaged in the watershed management plans. But that's a little different topic, I agree. But it does have some carryover for sure.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I turned on my camera. It's our non-point source 319 program. I probably would avoid the terminology of watershed plan if we can, and call it something else more dam safety sounding, just to keep people from being confused.
Could I throw in one more little caveat here? I mean, I agree with Amy 100%. You know, I always worry about mission creep, and if people say watershed. Up here in the UP, we're at our Father's Day flood, our 1,000-year alleged flood event. We lost tons of roads and all over the place. Yet we didn't lose one road on where there was a dam because it acted as a dam retention structure. But I can certainly see people saying, gosh, wouldn't it be great if they could warn us on all our roads? And I'm also finishing a project on bridge scour for MDOT. And as you should probably aware, the floodwater velocity becomes a critical factor in the bridge scour for bridge foundations. So, you know, that I'll just throw it out as an observational point.
So
Yeah,
I think the term you have where you change it in systems, probably just say in river systems. And I agree with Amy, you probably want to keep this separate from watershed management plans. The other thing I was going to suggest too is after O&M, probably put and EAP.
and what we're telling our staff basically, okay, flood events and dam failures aside, you know, that's separate EAP. But as far as routine operations and maintenance, the instructions to our staff basically are any disruption to the run of river flow. So whether it's up or down, you know, whether we're flushing or holding back some small amount, any disruption to the run of river, the instructions, the directives is to give a notification to the downstream dam owner. And it's as simple as that. You know, we don't go into any further details, you know, just a change in the run of river.
Yeah, I think that's appropriate because that's really what the law requires, right? That you maintain run of river. You're not allowed to store or mine water in the impoundments in the state.
Yeah, I think that, you know, in general, I'll say the vast majority of our dams really lack the ability to attenuate any significant flows. But at the same time, the reality is there are a lot of dams, you know, even high hazard dams where, you know, they don't go out and actually operate gates or anything like that. They just leave them be for the vast majority of the time. Now, if things do start looking hairy at a structure, they may go and pull logs or manipulate a gate. But again, they go and they do that, and there isn't always communication that, you know, to downstream or upstream, you know, dam owners that they're doing that. So I think that, you know, and I think this addresses that, but that's kind of what we're getting at. I guess that I'm a little nervous about the term when there's a change in run of river, because inherently, like I said, if they're not changing their opening, you know, it is affecting run of river potentially.
Yeah, but is that allowed though? I mean, I thought the law was you had to pass whatever water comes to the dam. Yeah. And that's, if you're increasing your impoundment height, you're not doing that.
So I think, Paul, I mean, the part 301 reads increase or diminishment of inland lake or stream, right? So if you take an affirmative action to do that, but I think the reality is that we have a lot of fixed crest dams that every change in flow results in a increase or decrease in the impoundment. You know, Glenn is fortunate to live in an area where the dams have enough gate capacity to pass like the 200-year flood with no rise in the ponds. I mean, they can do run a river, you know, way up, but the reality is that the hydraulics of most dams are such that you have some fluctuation. But yeah, I mean, so normal deviation from run a river during an event is, you know, expected at most dams. But that is the target for dams that have gate capacity, is to kind of instantaneous inflow equals instantaneous outflow, you know, so that you don't have swings. But yeah, I think, so yeah, maybe don't tie it to run a river, but give the flexibility, you know, in the plan base, because every dam is going to be a little bit different, right? The ones that have fixed crests are going to be very simple. The ones that have multiple gates and telemetry data and things like that are going to be more complex because there's more to monitor and there's more fluctuation. So I don't know. I think I like what Glenn is saying for the dams that have the capability to maintain run of river all the time, or most of the time. But we have to recognize the case where the dams are a more set it and forget it is their operation. You know, they just set the stop logs, they walk away until a big flood comes and you're getting towards the top of the dam, then they start pulling them out, you know, type of thing. And that's not exactly run a river, but it's that kind of, you know, certainly if they were going to go pull a bunch of stop logs, they should notify the downstream dam owner. Otherwise, maybe not.
And Luke, I think that was exactly the point that I was trying to convey, that events, you know, flooding events, high flow, things like that, that's just run of river that changes in due course, you know, of this event. I was really more talking about changes in run of river resulting from maintenance activities. You know, staff go out there and they pull the stop logs. They know they're doing this for some planned reason. And when they have control over changing the run of river, because we are allowed to change the run of river for maintenance reasons, you know, we just have to return it to the run of river course when we're done with those maintenance activities. And part of the requirement in doing all of that is notification to the downstream dam owners that, hey, we are going to be increasing flow because we're pulling stop logs, or we're opening gates to do some flushing, or, you know, whatever the activity is. It's maintenance driven. It's scheduled. It's something that we know is going to happen, and we have time to notify downstream dam owners.
Yeah, I guess I agree with that, and I think the way you're handling that is totally fine. I think as far as this language, I don't know that we want to put that in there. We don't want to drill down to that finite of a point, because this is both O&M, you know, general operation procedures, as well as emergency, you know, flood conditions. You know, we've got to consider all of those. So I don't want to fine tune down to that level. I think the highlighted text there, my personal preference would be to get rid of that, and it's just part of the context of the O&M and the EAP. Something that needs to be included within those documents.
It sounds like trying to find the balance here between putting enough bounds around it that, you know, this group is saying in these instances, this is when we want the reporting and the coordination, versus leaving it up to be developed as part of those individual plans and within the context of the individual systems. And so if folks are comfortable that that can be achieved within those plans, I'm curious here whether we can take that wording out like you suggested, Dan. Dan may be frozen there.
Well, I think it has to say something about river flow. I mean, because otherwise, if you take that whole block of text out that you've got highlighted, it's kind of hard to know what you're really talking about there.
Okay, so then maybe we just get rid of the maintenance activities.
So what if we said something like system-wide notifications when deviation from normal operations or during emergency events or something like that? You know, just something generic that captures, you know, you're taking affirmative action at the dam to deviate from your normal, you know, spillway operations, or there's an emergency where you're going to have to, you know, dump water or retain water or whatever it might be. Does that, something more generic like that, capture the essence?
Yeah, but it's got to say spillway or something on there, not just normal operations, because there's all kinds of things that have nothing to do with river flow.
Yes, I would say that, you know, the text you have in there now is fine, but then follow it up with that result in changes in flow.
Glenn, how does that sit for you?
I like it.
Do we need that as part of O&M and EAP plans in there?
Well, I think, I mean, I was just making that recommendation so that we at least are telling folks this is where, you know, as they're looking at making rule changes or whatever else, that this is where we would want that to go.
Okay.
I think I was supportive of that too.
Yeah, then up front there is better. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, still wordsmithing here a hair.
This this looks like an additional recommendation, though. I would think this is not part of 13A, is it?
No, I would see this as an additional new
Okay.
recommendation.
Okay, just wanted to.
So if everyone is comfortable with that wording, you know, we'll record it here. We do have just under half an hour left. Are there additional new recommendations that folks would like to offer within kind of the scope of this this work group as it relates to reevaluation, inspection, or monitoring? See Luke shaking his head no. John, no. Glenn, no. Okay. I mean, I'm not going to belabor it too much here. This is your opportunity to share additional thoughts and recommendations. You know, we'll even take it up a level and say, in addition to any of the categories, you know, are there other things that, you know, the groups haven't talked about that you feel should be talked about? Okay.
John, I think in one of our previous meetings or one of our offline meetings, we had talked about Eagle kind of has a list of proposed modifications if we're ever going to go into the statute and make some tweaks. So I think I've been tasked with compiling that. So just kind of a heads up for this group, you know, we'll have some things that we've been mulling over for the past few years about closing loopholes and providing better, you know, putting some better brackets around stuff. One of the things that I've been thinking about is qualifications-based selection for dam consultants. You know, some other states do it. Not that it's I don't know, but you know, just so that, I mean, more to come on that, but I think we're going to have a list of stuff to put in front of the whole task force, just, you know, of things that we would be seeking, you know, the blessing or input on stuff that we've been thinking about for several years now, probably.
Great. And so Luke, when in the process are you thinking that would come?
I think we said this week, right? We'd get it in front of the group through email, I think was what we talked about. And then just give everybody in the group kind of time to think about it, whether they want to jump behind some of those suggestions or whether that's something that Eagle would do separately, or, you know, so I think hopefully I'll have a cursory list of things that we've been thinking about before Thanksgiving here. And then you guys will have it in your emails to think about over until you know, bring it up at the next meeting or the following meeting or whenever it comes up.
Okay, great. Okay. I think, unless I'm missing anything from, I'll lean on Amy and Luke here a little bit. The last thing that we needed to do is see if anyone wanted to volunteer to report out to the full Dam Safety Task Force on this group's recommendations.
Hey, John, I think you're forgetting that we decided who was going to do that based upon that he missed our last meeting, our last breakout session. Wasn't he?
Well, John volunteered graciously to report out for a different group, so I didn't want to lean on him too hard here, but
you know, Glenn has volunteered somebody twice now, so maybe somebody needs to return the favor, huh?
I'm voting for Paul. Secret vote.
Just like everybody take one step back.
Yeah.
Oh, you got voted on twice.
I think Glenn volunteered Paul for the last one, so man, you're getting picked on, Paul.
I think that sounds like Glenn is volunteering, is what I heard. But no, really, is there anyone who would like to, raise their hand and volunteer to report out?
John, remind the group, Elizabeth was talking about like some questions that we're supposed to present and like broad-based summary sort of thing. Do you want to describe to the group what they're looking for again?
Yeah, let me turn back to my notes here. We're not looking for a detailed rundown on, change this word to that word, but to give a quick overview of those that the group advanced without any changes, and discussion around those that the group had more discussion about. So like we'd like you to talk about the meat of the conversation here. We're looking for maybe 5 minutes for each work group. I think they're still fleshing out the final agenda for the next meeting, but we're not looking for a detailed rundown for each and every recommendation, just high-level summary of what the group advanced, what the major discussion points were, and then I'm sure there will be a little bit of discussion from the full task force. Yep, and I found it in my notes here. So yeah, the recommendations dropped. Were there any that this group decided not to advance? Those that were adopted, those that were revised, and discussion of new recommendations.
It sounds like you're just going to basically go through this spreadsheet right here.
Yeah, and I think the team is still between PSC and Eagle working out the best way to share the information with everybody, because there is just so much to get through within the amount of time that we have. And like this group found and others found, there are many recommendations from the ASDSO that are really straightforward, and more or less folks have recommended adopting them as is. So, our feeling is that folks don't need to spend too much time on those elements. It's probably a better use of the limited time that everyone has together to highlight the things that folks changed. And so that's a long-winded way of saying that the information may get reorganized a little bit ahead of the November 30 meeting. And I can also say that we can expect more guidance here from Elizabeth on just what those expectations are. She's the primary contact on our end and coordinating with Amy and Luke. So we will be back in touch here with more guidance on what to expect for the report out.
Does everybody want me to do it?
See some thumbs up there.
It's only
Yeah.
5 minutes, Glenn. It won't be too painful.
Yeah,
Come on, Glenn, you'll be perfect.
I got it.
Okay. Well, I believe that's everything here that we hope to get through. This may be the first meeting that I've been a part of that ended a little ahead of schedule, which is remarkable. Amy or Luke, is there anything that I may be missing?
Nothing.
Okay, great. So next steps here, I'll recirculate the Excel document to reflect the changes that Paul laid out and the group discussed. And we'll take it from there and report back out to the full task force. So do want to say thank you to everybody for the great conversation that we've had as part of these groups. You all really made it easy for me as the facilitator to kind of sit back and let the group really discuss on its own. I really do appreciate everybody and everybody's knowledge and time and attention here. You really did make it easy for me.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Happy
Okay.
Thanksgiving.
Yep.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep. All right. Thank you.
Yep. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.